ye dead, Winslow!
Hey there, sorry about that, I got a little carried away. Today we're going to be talking about the Lighthouse. It's a lot to unpack. I feel like the runtime of the video might be long. I'm not sure where it's going to wind up, but it's probably not going to be my shortest video. So I have a lot to say about it. I've been wanting to talk about it for a long time. I feel like a lot of people saw the film and, dismissed it out of hand, thinking like this is just like a dumb movie with a bunch of fart jokes in it. But there's a lot going on, metaphorically, a lot of symbolism, a lot of really good directing. And I think it is maybe one of the better films to come out ever, and it deserves to be viewed as such. Main points I think we're going to be talking about, we'll be covering panopticism, we'll be talking about the American dream, sirens, a little bit of American history. I'm not a historian, but like the little bit that I understand of some of the historical background of when the film takes place, what the film is ultimately trying to say. There's a climate change reading of this film that I think plays into things and leads up to the shot of Prometheus at the end. So anyway, there's probably like 4 or 5 main sections here. I'm going to start off with panopticism and then just kind of go from there, breaking down different shots in the film and talking about them. If that interests you, stick around. If not, I don't give a shit. There's a lot of YouTubers who will start their video like, oh my gosh, we have to talk about blah, blah, blah. We don't have to do anything. You can leave. You're free to go. There are 100 things you could be doing other than watching me talk about the Lighthouse. But if you do stick around, there's a little treat at the end. There's not a treat. I don't know what the treat would be. It's probably just like I'm offering a free opportunity for you to subscribe. It costs you nothing to subscribe. Okay, fuck it. Let's get into it. Let's talk about this this behemoth of a film, this wonderful pure cinema, this wonderful expression of the human mind, and fuck. All right, so my first claim is that this is the panopticon. This is the Lighthouse is a representation of the panopticon as Foucault describes it, Jeremy Bentham's prison. He tells us it's an architecture for power. The main points are that through observation and even if it's not continuous supervision, right, it's this idea that mentally the knowledge that you could be being watched at any given time compels you to right behavior, because you may not be watched continuously, but you might think that you are being watched, and so it's a psychological effect that it has on you. And we see Willem tracking him, documenting him in his logbook, telling him to swab the deck, and yada yada yada. It's an architecture for power, Foucault says, that assures disequilibrium and dissymmetry. So, I'm not going to give you the full rundown on panopticism. I think you should read Discipline and Punish. I'm not going to even really try to paraphrase it too much here, but that's where we start. The Lighthouse is the panopticon, And when you watch this film, you should understand it as such. It's a film about supervision. And let's jump into the opening frames. The first shot we get is this one where it's the bow of the boat kind of going over the water. Then we cut to both of them standing in the boat side by side. And what I think about this shot is that they appear very much as equals. We can say these are two guys who are in the same boat. We know later on that they're both named Thomas. I was about to say they're both named Winslow. They're both named Thomas. Thomas means twin. In the script, they're referred to as old and young. So the idea is essentially that they are one and the same as individuals, separated, I guess, only by age. And I'll kind of, we'll get into my reading on why they are twins or whatever. My loose take is that it's like, as old is doing stuff to young, the idea is essentially like he's doing it to himself, that man hands on misery to man, it deepens like a coastal shelf, blah, blah, blah. Okay. The very next shot, we cut from them being smack dab in the center, in the same boat, looking like equals, being side by side. Then the very next shot, we shoot them each to their own respective sides of the frame. In montage, the meaning of any one shot, arises out of the collision between two shots. So by colliding these two shots together, we're going from them being very close together to suddenly being worlds apart. And the thing that comes between them is this island and this architecture. Because, like I said, the panopticon, it's an architecture for power that assures disequilibrium and dissymmetry. You should notice the shape of the island is slanted towards Willem Dafoe. I don't think that's just random framing. They decided who's going to stand on what side. They decided the side where the island slants towards Willem is going to be the side that he stands on. They spent a lot of time looking for a lighthouse that would work for the film, and they couldn't find a lighthouse that worked. So they went out and built one for the film, and they had to pick out an island, right? And I believe my thinking is that they settled on this island because this shot and this shape of it and the kind of slanting towards the older guy was important. Mise en scène, it's in the film, we can talk about it. If you don't think that's what Eggers wanted to do, whatever, but I think it's certainly important. I mean, this is the opening of the film, and in the opening shots, you're really establishing what is the film about. This film is about how two guys who are the same guy, more or less, they're twins, are totally stratified, that an architecture for power comes between them and makes one of them, who's bound up with the structure, sort of godlike, whereas the other guy is kind of shoveling the shit, okay? All right, as we continue on in the film, we're going to get inside the light station. Like I said with panopticism, Foucault talks about how it's the automatic functioning of power, right? And that it doesn't matter who operates the machinery, essentially. It's like a machine for power. That, with architecture, what you're really designing is human behaviors.
Architecture is just a way to think about how we live. When we design something, we design the behavior for people.
Based on how you lay out the space. Panopticism leads to the automatic functioning of power, he says. I feel like this is really underexposed. Oh well. Automatic functioning of power. Willem Dafoe is a piece of shit. I mean, not in real life. Dude's got a hammer, if you've ever seen it. in the film, Willem is like a drunk. He's got a failed marriage. He's got really like nothing going for him. But when he is on this island operating the lighthouse, he becomes like a god. Because as Foucault says, it does not matter who operates the machinery. It doesn't matter why they're there, how they got there. As long as there is a person in the tower and somebody to observe, the machine can work. Really, like, the end of the film, when Pattinson looks into the light and screams and falls out of the tower and then is pecked to death by seagulls, my take on it is more or less that he broke the machine. He had his little revolution, but then the only person he could observe to make the machine run and continue working, he killed. And so, there's people who do readings of the film like, Willem Dafoe is a god, or it's about sea monsters, or whatever the fuck. He's not a god. He has no mystical powers. It's a metaphor, right? Where when he operates the lighthouse, he becomes like a god. There's this shot where he's in the tower, and in the script, it says, something, is he hugging the light? Like, he's not. When I look at the shot of him in the tower and we see his silhouette, I think immediately of the Vitruvian Man, the Da Vinci drawing, right? Where it's not that he is a god, but he becomes basically the man of virtue, the ideal person, just because he gets to sit in the lighthouse tower. And we see this as he walks in. People laugh at the film. They're like, oh, he's in there peeing and then he farts. But I think what you should notice is when Pattinson walks in and we hear the sound of Willem Dafoe peeing, you should think of him almost like an animal marking his territory, right? It's not just like, oh, he's taking a piss and he's farting. He's marking his territory. And then there's this beam in the center of the room that divides where their two beds are. And Willem Dafoe comes out from behind that beam in the frame. And it's one of those moments where, as you're watching it, you should be thinking, it's as if he's bound up with the structure, right? Like, there's the shot later on where the light literally comes out of him after Pattinson spills his beans. You could talk about the 21st century and all the kinds of like tracking going on, and are our phones listening to us, and we're all spilling our beans online, blah, blah, blah. And how that gives whoever is observing you power over you, more or less. Target might know that I need a stainless steel frying pan before I do. I don't know if Target sells stainless steel frying pans, but now that I'm saying that, I'll probably see an ad for one tomorrow if they do sell a nice stainless steel pan. Robert spills his beans, and because Willem is bound up with this structure, he's not even in the room with him. He spills his beans, and then we like track up the machinery, the clockwork, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden we're on the top of the tower, and he's, we get the, I forget the painter, but it's a callback to a painting called Hypnosis. It's like Sascha Schneider. I don't remember. Some German painter from like the whenever the fuck back in the day, back when I was born. So he's bound up with the structure. He has his logbook. He's always tracking him. The lighthouse is always looming over him as he works. And this is sort of, again, the whole intro is panopticism. The whole film, there's no reading of the film if you don't include panopticism. Like, there are basically two things I think you need to look at if you want to understand panopticism, and it's Discipline and Punish and this film, because it's just like by the book. He talks about how the effects of the surveillance are continuous even if the actual surveillance is discontinuous. Robert can't always tell if he's being observed. The tower is just looming over him as he does his duties, and it has this psychological effect on him where, Willem doesn't have to physically confront him. He does try to physically confront him, crucially. He slaps him, and then we get this amazing shadow on the wall behind Robert, this huge shadow, where Willem understands that, like, in a physical confrontation, he loses every time. He has no power over Robert Pattinson. And he's observing that. Like, he sees the shadow, right? Because he's casting the light. I don't know, whatever. There's probably something there about Willem casting the light and blah, 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 shadow. But in a physical confrontation, he loses. He doesn't have to physically confront him. He can threaten to dock his wages. Everything's going in the logbook, etc., etc. And it has a psychological effect on Robert. And there's this wonderful shot that I like where he's cleaning the cistern that I think is maybe the best shot in the film, in terms of, like, the basic effects of panopticism is, we get the frame within the frame of the box of the cistern, and it's as if with the lighthouse looming over him, he's forced to think inside the box. Like, his whole life is just doing these duties now. And I feel like that sort of wraps up panopticism. I think we can move on to the American Dream, but if not, Editor West will put on his editor hat and go, this is my editor hat. I wear this while I edit so that my third eye doesn't get in the way of my enlightenment, American Dream.
That's what the owners count on, the fact that Americans will probably remain willfully ignorant of the big red, white, and blue dick that's being jammed up their assholes every day. Because the owners of this country know the truth. It's called the American Dream, because you have to be asleep to believe it. But say what you want about American folks. Yeah.
All right, you want to talk about the American Dream? I know you do. So Robert Pattinson finds the statue of the mermaid, the Scrimshaw trinket, in his bedroll, and he tucks it away, and it's a trinket that looks like a siren, looks like a mermaid. And we get these montages throughout the film where he's beating off to the mermaid trinket, not the actual mermaid. The real siren is a figment of his imagination, right? That's his dream. She's associated with the Lighthouse Tower. She's associated with work, because he's often masturbating to her, like interstitched, cut together with it's the sequence where he's masturbating. He is thinking about her, looking at the Scrimshaw trinket, thinking about this vision he has of this mermaid while he's working, and ultimately, what he realizes is that he also thinks Willem Dafoe is sleeping with this siren up in the Lighthouse Tower, right? So his idea is that he's going to work really hard, one day get into the Lighthouse Tower, and, fuck a mermaid, I guess. Get bitches or whatever. And at some point he realizes, as he pulls up the lobster pot, that it's bullshit. There's nothing, it's all in his head. And so my reading of the film has always been that the siren, which, remember, like sirens, going back to Odysseus, I think back in the Odyssey they were depicted as like winged, like harpies almost, that are like flying, but they're singing and leading men to their doom. Over time, the symbol, I guess, has evolved and is often depicted as mermaids. Even in like ancient Greek retellings, I feel like oftentimes the sirens don't have wings and they're swimming. They're mermaids. Sirens lead sailors to their doom. So when you think about the siren in this film, and really it's a trinket, right? She's not real. She doesn't exist. She's in his head, right? Sirens lead sailors to their doom. He has this idea that, he's escaped from basically killing Winslow and taking on his identity. He wants to get far away, work really hard, save up, raise a roof over his own head with no one to tell him what for. And it's not going to get him anywhere. He's never going to get into the light station by just climbing the ladder, pulling himself up by his bootstraps. I think one of the things you have to think about with regard to this film is that it takes place in 1892, which is in the script. I think it's in the script that it takes somewhere off the coast of wherever in 1892. That's not a random date. In America, there was something called the Panic of 1892, where I think, the market crashed or whatever, and then there was maybe a bank run or something. But it was kind of, I think it's considered maybe as bad or worse of a depression than the Great Depression. So I don't, part of me thinks that one of the reason the tender doesn't come to pick them up is probably because they're on strike or out of work. And, nobody knows that these guys are even out on this island. So there's bad inequality, right, that leads to a huge crash. Where Robert Pattinson comes from is the Hudson Bay Bush Company, right? They mentioned that he was a logger, I guess, cutting down trees for the Hudson Bay Bush Company. Hudson Bay Bush Company is a real company that around this time was a major monopoly, I think, in like northern America and maybe into Canada. So he's been caught up in these like really bad systems of like perpetuating inequality or whatever. I don't know what you want to say. However you want to put that more academically than I will. That's Robert Pattinson's background. He is still of the belief that if he goes far away, he's got this assumed identity, and he's of the belief that if he goes far away offshore, he can start a new life, work hard, and one day raise a roof over his own head with no one to tell him what for. And Willem's like, same old boring story, eh? That's the American dream. That's what everybody is working hard for, right? But ultimately, that moment, like, the mermaid is associated with work through montage, like especially when we get the big montage when he's masturbating to this idea of sleeping with her. But then again, she's associated with the Lighthouse station itself, being up in the tower, because he kind of, I think he envisions Willem Dafoe sleeping with her up there. Like, remember when the goo like drips down? He also, I don't know if we hear the siren. Actually, it might just be a tentacle. I don't actually know if that's as overt. But when he's about to kill Willem Dafoe, Willem morphs into the mermaid. And what I make of that is that this is Pattinson's lust for power, more or less. He's about to essentially stage like a bloody coup and take power. And in that moment, we see the object of his desire is essentially to be Willem Dafoe, to be the older Thomas. And so he's about to kill him, and he sees this mermaid, and he's like mesmerized by it. So that, to me, it's all the American dream. Like, remember, he finds the Scrimshaw trinket in his bedroll. It's often like perched at his bedside table. Remember when the gull comes and lands on the window? The mermaid is perched there on the bed, above the bed. There's another sequence. Oh no, I think it cuts to she's in the bed with him. So the things we're visually associating the mermaid with, or the Scrimshaw trinket. The Scrimshaw trinket is associated with the bed, right? Repeatedly. It's found in the bedroll. He takes it to bed with him. He dreams about her at night. So I think it's fairly supported by the text, I'll say, that the Scrimshaw trinket at least is like this object of the American dream to him. Whereas the mermaid, as we know, as a symbol like deployed throughout history, it's the siren. She's screaming, ah, it's like they cast a supermodel, so she's supposed to be like this object of lust, leading him to his doom. Like he thinks he's gonna work hard, it's gonna pay off, and at some point he realizes that it's not. So that's, I guess, I don't know what else I have to add on that, but that's another big part of my reading of the film is this is an American film about two guys. One's, in the tower, one's in the hierarchy, one has power, the other is very much outside of it, but dreaming of becoming that next guy. You know the saying about like there are no poor Americans, they're all like just temporarily embarrassed millionaires. Like everybody thinks, me included, like everybody thinks, oh, one day it'll work out, right? I'm gonna make it. And not everybody does. And so, it's a story about two guys who to me represent a sort of microcosm of, for a while I thought it was like class conflict, but it's really more so, I guess it is class in a certain extent, but class in America, like really, when we talk about inequality, it's often along the lines of age, right? It's like, when you're young, you're just taking a beating and slowly trying to save up, and eventually, an older American moves into a higher tax bracket. Generally speaking, that's the way it goes. It's a little more fluid than I think people let on. I don't know if that trend will continue, because that kind of brings us to the climate change reading of the film, which I think is also important. These guys are caught up in a machine that is automatically functioning. They both have their duties. There's a keeper's manual. They're fulfilling their functions, right? To inhabit this rock that is actually completely inhospitable to human life, right? And we constantly see Robert moving coal. Like he's moving coal, which is a fossil fuel. He's shoveling it into the furnace. We get all these shots of, the fire and whatnot and everything that's being burnt and yada yada. They even eventually are drinking kerosene, which is a fuel. And there are oftentimes when he's moving the coal, the wheelbarrow of it, he's interrupted by a seagull, right? And the seagull, on the one hand, is often representative of, I guess, the dead other lighthouse keeper, the second who Willem Dafoe killed, or allegedly, the one that's missing an eye. But at the same time, I see in the film the seagull is like the symbol of nature, right? And so we see these confrontations between the gull and Robert when he's moving a fossil fuel, right? And I don't think that's nothing, because, Eggers said, like, you don't go out trying to make a film about the zeitgeist. He said this about this film. But this film very much is zeitgeisty. It's the spirit of the time. So I don't think it's odd to see a climate change thing going on here. And crucially, he's tending the cistern, which is kind of how they purify their water. And he's interrupted again by the seagull. He's doing something, I guess, kind of unnatural with maybe chemicals. I don't know exactly what goes on in the cistern. I think it's kind of like septic, but above ground. And he's kind of being harassed by the gull. And he beats it to death. Immediately after beating the gull to death on the side of the cistern, we track all the way up to the top of the lighthouse, and the winds have changed. And we're told, it's bad luck to kill a seagull, and that, killing the gull, it was ye that changed the winds on us, was ye. That's That's literally like when we talk about carbon footprint or like recycling more or how can I do more to help the world? I'm going to drive an electric car. The battery, we're going to take on the Congo. Anyway, the finger is often pointed at the people carrying out the activity. Robert Pattinson is more or less just in the line of duty. I know killing the seagull is not part of his duty, but he's, you know, the one shoveling the coal, doing all the actions. And so in some ways he's the one holding the knife. And it's like, you changed the winds on us. You drove climate change because you didn't reduce, reuse, recycle, and drive an electric car with a huge fucking battery in it and rubber tires or whatever. I don't know. I think electric cars are a scam. There's no green future without trains. And somebody's got to say it. There's probably no green future in general. But anyway, can one human's activity change the winds and bring in a storm? In the logic of the film, yes, but at the same time, no. But when I think about the film as sort of this microcosm of like a little tiny society where Willem Dafoe is representing kind of the hierarchy, the established order, and Pattinson is more like a working class guy. That shot of him with the shadow on the wall, like he's kind of like the Leviathan, like the masses, right? I don't know that there's like a really distinct like class reading of the film, but I think there's enough there where like if you want to say this is about communism, like go crazy. I don't necessarily see that in it. I guess why I wouldn't consider it like a communist or like left wing or like socialist, like pro-revolution film is that, well, what does he say about the revolution? Like, okay, he breaks the machine, right? And so it's almost as if as they continue on in their automatic functioning of just like going like clockwork, doing what they do, going about their business, storm comes in, suddenly the status quo is interrupted. They can't go on business as usual. Resources become very scarce. They run out of water, they run out of liquor, they run out of food. They turn on they basically return to a state of nature, right? Which is in some ways a little bit of a projection for a potential future, you know, depending on what you believe. You know, water scarcity is going to be a real issue. I don't know that, you know, I don't think humans are going extinct anytime soon, but like massive political upheaval driven probably by scarcity of water is maybe something we'll see in our lifetimes. Like people in Arizona already don't go outside in the summer. Like it's a ghost town, and if you do, you die. Like but people are moving there anyway. Blah blah blah. Return to a state of nature. It's almost as if them going about their business, doing things by the book as you do it, you know, eventually forces Robert Pattinson's hand, like, and where revolution and like violent upheaval sort of becomes inevitable, but it's not salvation, right? And I think that's ultimately my reading of the film, why we deploy Prometheus, why he falls from the tower, why it's not I consider it sort of a prophetic film of like, you know, if inequality keeps up, it's going to make political violence and upheaval inevitable, but that upheaval is not going to be an antidote because it'll come too late, and ultimately, you know, we fail. And that's kind of why, you know, Prometheus, you know, pecked to death by gulls, he stole fire from the gods. It's like, it's a pretty pessimistic take, I think, on our future, and that's what I see in the film. And where it's like, okay, so you know, my Professor Bainbridge would have been like, all right, well, what about panopticism? Well, what about he's like, okay, it's a film about panopticism, but what about panopticism? It's that we're gonna go business as usual, like clockwork, because we're kind of all caught up in this machine and power relations of which we are ourselves the bearers, because we not only like enforce it but reinforce it and bring it to ourselves, etc. So we're all gonna go on business as usual, right? And it's unsustainable because we're gonna run out of resources. A storm is gonna come that's gonna knock us back to, you know, sort of a state of nature. There's going to be violence, and then the little society on Pilot Rock that was hanging around is no more. And so that's really more or less like, you know, driven by his American dream or whatever, he's going to keep going about the status quo, right? And it's not going to work out. Yeah, I don't know. So that's I guess that's everything I got to say about the movie. I guess that's all I got on my mind. No, there's definitely more. I feel like that's all I can think of just now, though. You know, there's definitely more in it. And my reading on the film, it's not the definitive reading, right? It's just mine, right? I think what makes the film so special is that because there's so much symbolism, so much metaphor, so much open to interpretation, that there are many readings possible for this film. I just think mine is the most coherent. You know, I think at least panopticism, like open and shut case, like this is panopticon, duh. American Dream is the Scrimshaw trinket, I think is definitely supported by the text. The climate change reading is a little hairier. But I think it's still there. And, you know, microcosm of, I guess, maybe not exactly class warfare, but kind of class warfare, but definitely intergenerational, like intergenerational. Does inter mean within the same generation? Generational conflict, old versus young. And how, you know, we just keep going about with that status quo. We've been doing it forever, I think. Like, you know, the older folks are always going to have it better off than the young folks. That's kind of the nature of things, right? Like over time, you're going to accumulate some advantages. Not, you know, not everybody, but for the most part, it's going to be like, you know, who's in the higher tax bracket? Probably older Americans compared to people in their 20s, right? And so who has the power, you know, who knows the lay of the land, who knows this, you know, how to play the game or whatnot, like say that's in your book too, and knows all the games and tricks and whatnot, and is bound up with the structures. It's the old folks, right? And it's not like they're evil, because they were young folks at one point. They all went through it. You know, it changes over time, and it compounds, and it gets worse. And if we keep perpetuating the cycle, I think what the film is ultimately saying is it's ruinous for us as a species, as a whole entire species. So yeah, I guess I think that's it. I think that's all I've got. Thanks for watching. If you're here now, just take a moment to whisper into your phone, blueberries, and see if you get an advertisement tomorrow. I don't know. No, I knew a guy who was on the Amazon Alexa team. No, I don't know if I can say this.
Keep your temper now, lad. 'Tis fine work, and you're making eye marks in me logbook. Them's gospel. I'll drop you down a few feet.